Despite appearances, this is not going to be a Nidus build video. If you would like to see my Nidus build video, it is a recommended video right here, go check that out if you like. But no, today is about Sentinels. I've begun to develop a sort of underground reputation as someone who loves Sentinels because I made a build where my Sentinels soloed a Kuva Fortress capture mission. And yeah, I do like Sentinels a lot, but at the time, I didn't really have very many that were well set up. Now I do, so I'm going to tell you about them. You can view this as a sort of Sentinel roster review. I'm going to talk about the Sentinels even that I do not have and why I don't have them, why I don't bother with them. And I'm going to talk about other kinds of companions too, albeit briefly. First of all, we're going to talk about the general purpose of having a Sentinel, you know, like what they do. And for that I'm just going to use Diriga as an example. I'm also going to review Diriga first, so let's get right into it. So the big important Sentinel mods that are very, very good and strong on all Sentinels are Animal Instinct, to a lesser degree Mediray, which we'll talk about in a sec, to a lesser degree Guardian, which we'll talk about in a sec, and the most important one, obviously, is Vacuum. Vacuum should be on every Sentinel you ever have. Animal Instinct should also be on every Sentinel you ever have, unless your Warframe has it. Like, I believe Ivara's passive is basically just this, so I guess in that case, no. If it applies to your Sentinel weapon, I would also say that Fired Up is a core mod. If your Sentinel is going to attack, then this mod should be on here, because it increases your outgoing damage by 60%. That's massive, and should obviously be on there if you're going to attack. And then Regen, because keeping your Vacuum alive is really, really important. So basically, like, these three mods, at the very least, are basically core, and then if your Sentinel is gonna do damage, then Fired Up. And as long as you do not mind that it will make your Sentinels stop doing other stuff for a little while, Mediray is pretty good, because over the course of you just standing around, this mod will eventually top off your Warframe's health, which can be very valuable on longer missions, or just missions that involve a lot of standing around, like between waves of an interception or a defense. This mod ends up being pretty good, so I think it's very strong. That's why. But it's not as core as the other ones. And then Guardian, obviously following the same logic, and it tops off your shields instantly, so that's very strong. Having those out of the way, the next thing that you want to look at is how you're going to make your Sentinels survivable. You're going to have to figure out what your Sentinel has a good amount of, and then put on the appropriate mod to boost it. So Diriga has very good base health. It's got 350 base health, so Enhanced Vitality brings that to over 1,000, very nice. So Diriga will be health based. That's great because it has a bit of armor, so that will be rather chunky. But as a counterexample, Wyrm Prime here has the highest shields of all Sentinels, and as you can see, it has 1,000 shields. So if we take a look at that build, now we've got Calculated Redirection in here instead. Now Wyrm Prime doesn't have as much armored health. Yes, armor is pretty nice, but it's got very bad base health. But Diriga only has 50 armor, so its health is not worth that much more than Wyrm Prime shields, but Wyrm Prime shields will regenerate. I mean, they're renewable, you know? So Sentinels are not often going to survive direct sustained fire. That's not something a Sentinel is going to be able to survive. So having regenerating renewable health is very valuable because over the course of a mission, the Sentinel will be able to sustain its, you know, alright health pool and survive many instances of taking like a little stray fire, you know, a couple of bullets hit it. A Wyrm Prime will be able to regenerate back that health, but anyway, that's a trade-off you have to consider. Getting back to Diriga, Diriga's specialty is crowd control, so, I mean, this is a theme among good Sentinels, but Diriga is very good at it. So, Electropulse is an ability on a very short cooldown, whereby your Diriga will permanently taser an enemy, causing them to be only very briefly able to act. Sometimes they'll be able to get a shot off, but for the most part, they're just stun-locked for as long as you're in range. Your Diriga will just pick a nearby target and do it. So this is very, very good if you don't want things to be in melee range of you. For example, if you're Mesa and you don't want a Butcher to get through your Shatter Shield, then Diriga will stun any enemies that get close enough to melee attack you, while enemies far away can't hurt you anyway because of your Shatter Shield. So that's pretty nice. And then Arc Coil, a much less powerful preset, but still a good one. Your Sentinel will chain lightning up to 7 enemies, and each has a 10% status chance for electricity. If the electricity does proc, then you're going to get a stun on all of them, because the chain lightning will proc to all of them. So basically, you usually have about a 70% chance if it hits a whole crowd to stun all of them, which is somewhat reliable. It's very brief, your Sentinel does it very quickly, so it's worth including, because even though it's not that reliable, it does often stun them, and that's good. Anyway, the remaining unique thing about Diriga, besides its good health, is its attack range. Diriga has the highest attack range of all Sentinels at 70 meters, while Carrier has only 10 meters. So Diriga and Carrier are both very tanky. Carrier's a bit tankier. And the difference is that Diriga can attack from much further away. So Carrier wouldn't make a good carrier for your Deth Machine Rifle, but Diriga makes an excellent carrier for it. Because it can start attacking from very far away, it has time to ramp up fired up. The Deth Machine Rifle will have time to spool up, which means that once your target is in range where the Deth Machine Rifle is going to hit it a lot, it's at maximum damage and you do very significant DPS, so that's very strong. Obviously this is good with the Vulklok, the Sentinel Sniper Rifle too, but it's also very strong with Deth Machine Rifle, and that's why I've chosen this to be my honorary Sentinel to carry it. Personally, I have my Diriga or my Wyrm Prime carry my Deth Machine Rifle. That said, let's briefly talk about Wyrm Prime for a minute. Wyrm Prime's CC ability is Crowd Dispersion. This is a big area knockback. It happens rather quick, the enemies fly back rather far, it is a pretty good crowd control ability. Couple that with the fact that Wyrm Prime is, in its own different way, pretty survivable, and you've got a fairly nice Sentinel, also a very good candidate to carry a Deth Machine Rifle. Diriga and Wyrm Prime, because of their good, quick CC abilities and their good attack ranges, Wyrm Prime has 30 meters, are my choices for Skirmisher Sentinels. These are the Sentinels that I take when I want them to just add some damage and fight alongside me. These are my basic Sentinels for that. Now the one difference with Wyrm Prime is it doesn't have 2 precepts, so I've added in Sanctuary. Now this creates a big shield dome around you when you're reviving allies, but the interesting thing about it is that it's actually affected by calculated redirection. So if you have a Sentinel on which calculated redirection is good, as in mostly none of them but Wyrm Prime, then this is a much more powerful mod because the shield gets 250% stronger. So that's why I've chosen this on Wyrm Prime and not on my Diriga. And there's really not much to say about it, but I'll show you my Deth Machine Rifle build. As you can see, I have a ribbon for it that is incredibly good, and I'm going to take that off and show you how much the damage goes down. As you can see, it becomes comparatively paltry once you take that off. Now, the reason that I've bothered to show you a Deth Machine Rifle ribbon mod build is because people so seldom actually use their Sentinel ribbon mods that you actually have a pretty good chance at acquiring one. I would recommend that you actually try to get one. It won't be that hard, and so many stats are good for the Deth Machine Rifle that it's not that bad. You don't want crit chance or crit damage, the weapon has bad crits, and you don't want status chance, but anything else would be good. Any damage, fire rate, reload speed, magazine size, any of those things would be good. Remember not to do ammo maximum because Sentinel weapons have infinite ammo, but otherwise you're just going for base damage. I would recommend Vile Acceleration on every Sentinel weapon, basically, because they're either very slow or their wind-up time is important, and you can speed that up with Vile Acceleration, getting you to that nice 60% from fired up faster. Now let's talk about something very different. This is Djinn, albeit with a lot of fashion frame additions. Has a very unique little crowd control ability called Fatal Attraction. This ability hypnotizes nearby enemies periodically. There have to be multiple of them nearby. They will become hypnotized and outlined in Djinn's energy color, and they will then harmlessly walk toward you and your Djinn. They will not be able to attack, but they will not be actually crowd controlled in any way. They just walk toward you without shooting. So this is effectively crowd control, and it's very, very strong, and your Djinn can do it very often, which is crucial. Your Djinn will be able to pacify enemies in this manner that get close to you, so it's a really, really good Sentinel to run with a fragile Warframe. Djinn itself is not that tanky, but as long as it is not going to be directly in line of fire, it does have a very strong crowd control skill, and very good attack range, almost as good as Diriga. You might be able to see where I'm going with this. With the Vulklok, the Sentinel Sniper Rifle, your Djinn will be able to take out enemies from afar, and harmlessly mind control enemies that get close to you, making it a fairly good defensive Sentinel, offensively defensive. It itself is not that tanky, but it has a strong effect on the battlefield and keeps enemies away from you, or at least keeps them harmless if they get close. Once again, my Vulklok has a ribbon mod, and it's a pretty good one at that. Keep in mind that zoom percent on Sentinel weapons increases how far away the AI will shoot them from, so it effectively increases the range of the Sentinel by 76%, which is amazing because it already has 60 meters of range. This means your Sentinel can shoot from extremely far away, and this weapon does very good damage. It has a very nice crit chance, almost always crits, and crits for 5.5 times damage with a maxed Vital Sense. That means you're going to be getting in the area of 6,000 damage, a bit more than that actually. And again, this weapon is not fully maxed out yet, although of course I have a very good Riven mod. So yeah, very strong weapon. Again, my argument with the Deth Machine Rifle, nobody likes Sentinel Rivens, so you might be able to get one rather easily, or you just have one sitting around. And in that case, there you go. Lots of things are good on these weapons. On the Vulklok, it's even more true than the Deth Machine Rifle. You could basically get anything. Crit chance, crit multiplier, damage anything, fire rate would be a godsend. To finish up with Djinn here, because it only has one offensive precept, but is not really worth Sanctuary on, because it is very squishy. In other words, I don't want to put Sanctuary on it because if enemies get close to it, it is likely to die, whereas Wyrm Prime has a larger, pseudo health pool, and is a bit more likely to survive. It's still a good mod on Djinn, but I chose not to use it. Instead I have Shield Charger, which is basically a worse version of Mediray. The only good thing about Shield Charger is that it increases your shield regen speed, so if you're in the middle of a firefight and your shields will take a hit, you'll get them back a lot faster, which is good sometimes. It's better than nothing, All the things that Djinn does are rather slow. Fatal Attraction and its attack rate is very slow, so I decided I was okay with it spending a lot of time sitting around channeling a beam of pseudo-health to be in my party. That's why I chose it. It's not necessary by any means. You could just use... In fact, I think I will make a substitution. This mod explodes in a very, very large radius, and it does a knockback when it happens, so it's actually not a bad defensive measure. If you're worried about your Sentinel dying and putting you in jeopardy, this mod will give you a brief period to get away. Now, of course, for the fourth one, I have saved the one that most of you are probably the most interested in. Carrier Prime holds a special place among Sentinels, because as you can see, I do not have a weapon on it. Carrier Prime is the Sentinel that I choose when I need a Sentinel to be alive. In other words, when having a vacuum is not just helpful, but is actually part of the build. So an example of this would be Necros Prime, where you cannot really play Necros effectively unless you can always vacuum up health orbs. You need to be able to do that. It's not just convenient or helpful, you will die without the ability to do that. You need that as part of your build, so that's what I use Carrier Prime for. It is the overall tankiest Sentinel, having very respectable armor, the best health of all Sentinels, and also not even terrible amounts of shielding with a mod. So it is the tankiest Sentinel, basically, overall, and that makes it an extremely good candidate to survive big hits and also damage over time. It's got good shields, so it has some replenishable health, and great EHP with its health and armor, so it can actually survive lots of hits. As you might expect, I just put on every single survivability mod. Also Mediray and Shield Charger, again self-destruct is also fine. And then Animal Instinct and Regen are still core. And Vacuum, of course, at the very top. Now the other thing that Carrier Prime is good for, that I don't use it for that often, but is very strong, is Ammo Case. This is basically an ammo mutation mod for your weapons, but you don't have to spend a slot for an ammo mutation mod. Personally, I use it with incredibly ammo-hungry weapons like the Azima or the Pox, but not something that I would focus on for Carrier. I usually use Carrier for its hardiness. So it's a great Sentinel if you absolutely need a vacuum. Again, that's on builds where it's not just convenient, but where it's part of the build, like Necros, or I use it on my Neza build because his high friction makes it hard to pick up. So, you'd want a Sentinel with vacuum anyway, but if it dies, you kind of can't pick up loot. It makes it really hard to move to... Having said that, we're going to talk about the Sentinels that I do not have. First of all, base Carrier, Carrier Prime is better. Base Wyrm, Wyrm Prime is better. Although it's worth noting that Wyrm's health is higher, its overall ability to be an effective survivable Sentinel is not better than Wyrm Prime's. Having a large amount of shields that are renewable is definitely better overall. Wyrm not good, Carrier not good. Now for the two that I actually dislike, Dethcube. This is my favorite looking Sentinel because it's just adorable and hilarious, but it's very bad. Its attack, its Vaporize precept, is basically just a bad version of Diriga's permanent stun thing, but it does do good damage at very low levels. It will basically one-shot anything at low levels, so that's kind of cool, but otherwise it's basically just the worst Diriga. I would highly recommend that you just get a Diriga instead. Also, similarly to other companions that are not as good, it also does not have standout health or shields, or armor. It is also very squishy. It is one of the squishiest Sentinels. So it's great because it's easy to build and you can get a Deth Machine Rifle off of it, perhaps the best overall Sentinel weapon. It's not a good actual Sentinel. So, as you can see, I have sold mine. Shade. Well, Shade is not bad because Shade has the ability to give you stealth when enemies are nearby, but the Huras Kubrow has the same ability, but in a larger radius, so I would recommend that you use the Huras Kubrow instead. Now, some notes about Shade though. It's easier to get than a Huras Kubrow, and it's kind of tanky. It has good health, so that's a good thing about it. If you wanted to use a Sentinel that's not carrier, as like your I need to make sure my Sentinel never dies Sentinel, Shade's not a bad choice for that. It has good amount of health, about the same survivability as Diriga, so there's that. One quick thing that's worth noting is that the Shade's attack precept, if you were going to have it carry a Sentinel weapon, does not allow it to attack until you have taken damage, which is a step below other Sentinel's weapons. Of course, it's meant to work with the stealth ability and keep you undetected, but now, lastly, to Helios, which is a Sentinel that I do have, but I'm not currently done setting up. Now, Helios is not very tanky either. The same thing with Dethcube, where it doesn't have standout health, shields, or armor, so it's not that good at surviving. Djinn has at least a little bit better. Helios has a very, very good quality, and no, it is not scanning things into the codex, although that's very helpful. Helios has Detect Vulnerability, which is a precept that puts little vulnerability spots on a target's body part, as long as you've scanned them into your codex fully. That target spot gives you massive bonus damage, absolutely massive bonus damage, so that's very good. And the Helios's weapon, the Deconstructor, is very, very powerful, is very, very strong. It's basically a boomerang, like a glaive weapon, that will bounce between targets, do lots of damage. I will be covering Helios in the future. I do think he's overall a step below the Sentinels that I've shown, but he does have a place, and he can be a very strong skirmishing Sentinel, so I will eventually show him. To finish things out, I'm going to quickly talk about the incubated companions that I think are worth a look. So, as for Kubrows, personally, I think that the one that is worth your attention is the Huras Kubrow. This is the Kubrow I was mentioning before that has an ability like Shades. If there are enemies nearby, the Huras Kubrow and Shade will stealth you. And the stealth is permanent as long as there are enemies nearby. Very, very powerful. You can use this for survival missions, you can use it to revive people in any mission, you can kind of use it to break into spy vaults safely. Also very niche. If you really feel like you want your companion to be doing that, then I would recommend you check out the Huras Kubrow. It has a very significantly larger stealth radius than Shade does, and it's also a Kubrow, which is a bit of variety if you like doggy. Turning to Kavats, both the Smita and the Adarza are pretty strong, but I would say that the only one that is worth the forma is the Adarza. Kavats can do very, very good damage, very high damage, and they can also do it to multiple targets at once, a quality that Sentinel weapons are not very good at, except the Deconstructor. But the Adarza also has a very powerful buff that it gives you and your party very often. You get about 50% uptime total, where it gives you flat 60% crit chance on everything. So again, not additive, like if a weapon had 1% crit chance, it would go to 61% crit chance. That's really strong and definitely worth your attention, alongside the fact that the Adarza can do actually decent damage. So I think that's pretty strong. The Smita's random buffs are not bad, a lot of them are very powerful. It's just kind of unreliable, so I think it's not really worth it. And at last, something near and dear to my heart. Nessie! Oh, my child. My Nessie. So, this is Nessie. Nessie is my Helminth Charger. The Helminth Charger is a special kind of pet, classified as a Kubrow, that you can get from draining a Helminth cyst into a Kubrow egg upon incubation. If you'd like details on how to do that, and a full review of this pet specifically, I'll leave a link to that video above here. That's going to do it for my roster review on companions, mostly Sentinels, but also incubated companions. Again, overall, I recommend Diriga and Wyrm Prime as Deth Machine Rifle users. I recommend Djinn with the Vulklok as a sort of sniper, long-range area control Sentinel. I recommend Carrier Prime as your best Sentinel if you must have your Sentinel survive. And then I recommend, for incubated companions, the Huras Kubrow for stealth, the Adarza Kavat for overall damage from a Sentinel or a companion, and the Helminth Charger as a good bruiser. Let me know if there are any things that you think I should take a look at or build my Sentinels for, and let me know if you liked the video, let me know if you have any questions about Sentinels or precept orders or anything, and I'll see you next time.